Awesome.
Powerful, right?
Yeah, that's great.
Well, let's see. We have about we have like 9 people in the call right now, I think. I'm checking the chat to see, is there anything I need to help you guys with? Danette, let me understand your question. Is there a way to change the login instead of what we have now? You had to review. What we found, Danette, is that if you are already logged into your Zoom account, you can get right in.
Yeah, it didn't work.
Okay, because I don't think I have, like, I think it's the option is that it's the password is automatically connected to your login to your account. But it is a security measure to prevent Zoom bombing.
Yeah, no, I realized that, but it was, yeah, that's the first time I've had difficulty getting in. Anyway, hopefully it'll not be an issue next time.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll just see how it goes. Maybe it was a glitch in mine, which could very well be because I've been having issues with it anyway, so.
I also did turn off the waiting room once we hit the hour, and it seems like a couple of you that were struggling with problems might have been able to get in after the waiting room was turned off.
Got it.
So anyway.
Yeah, onward.
So as last month, we talked about how this meeting's going to be a little bit more casual than what I initially had started out with, like trying to follow Robert's rules and stuff, because that's kind of silly. But also on top of it, last month, I somehow deleted my meeting minutes from May. So I can't, prove because I had some computer issues and I had 3 different laptops and I didn't know which laptop the file was on. And it ended up getting, I think, wiped away during like a synchronization that I did with one of the work laptops. So I lost my May meeting minutes. So this month, instead, I just did it as a PowerPoint with just sort of like intro slides. So I'm not going to share screen the entire time, but I will share screen like long enough just to like direct the conversation, to like give it some, oh, that's where I need to like escape full screen or something. There we go. And then I'm also in Google, whatever the Google program is that does slide decks, because I don't have any office.
See, Mr. Potato Head has a car and boat trailer, and there's a shopping trailer.
There we go. Sorry, that was you too. Okay, so so we don't have a ton of people on the call, so which is okay. So we can do introductions. So we'll go ahead and I'll take it off full screen so that we can see your lovely faces as we do this. And we'll go ahead and introduce ourselves. So Dr. Bill, do you want to get started?
Sure. Hi, everybody. The former South Orange County resident who moved up to Central OC 2 years ago. So I'm honorary visitor, I spoke. Anyhow, retired emergency room doctor, living just east of Santa Ana in the foothills, kind of north of Tustin. And great to be here. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Spencer.
Hi everyone, my name is Spencer Kelly. I am a special education instructional aide and I'm getting my teaching credential at Cal State Long Beach. I've also been involved in activism in Huntington Beach and Orange County. Most recently, I've done the Grim Reaper protest in Huntington Beach in response to the Orange County Board of Supervisors opening our beaches. Did a lot of work helping volunteer with Indivisible OC 48 to get Dana Rohrabacher out of office, which we successfully did. Yeah, just looking forward to getting more involved in progressive Democratic groups because I'm all for Bernie, Medicare for All, the New Deal. And yeah, nice to meet you guys.
Great, thank you. And just as a reminder to everybody, the call is being recorded and it's being broadcast to our Facebook page. So don't say anything that you don't want everybody to know. Okay, Rich.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rich Procida. I'm from Whittier. I'm an author, attorney, and journalist. I write for LAProgressive.com. I have a podcast called Bible Study for Progressives. I was really big on the impeachment movement. And so I've been speaking on those things. So that's it.
Danette.
So I am Danette Abbott Wicker. I live in Orange, and I am involved with Progressive Democrats of America fund banking, and all sorts of good calls going out to make sure people vote for Bernie in the primaries, and then also local candidates as well. And then I'm also involved with Climate Reality Project. I'm actually going to be taking their online courses, I guess. It was supposed to be in Las Vegas in March, but obviously got canceled because of COVID. So I'll be doing that for a couple weeks in July, and I'm really excited about it. Become a leader in the climate movement, hopefully.
Awesome. Ellen. Let's see if I can unmute you. Hold on. Okay, now we can hear you. Oh, no, we can't. You did not unmute. There we go.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I live in Huntington Beach. I have been active in HB Huddle. I don't know if Spencer knows about that, but they support local candidates mostly. Yeah, thank you. And I don't do anything in an organized manner. I just show up and I show up. So kind of fits my personality. So I want to see what you guys are up to. I'm really concerned about voter suppression, actually. So I'd like to see what people are doing about that. I know California is okay, but yeah. And I'm here to listen and to learn.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining us. Okay, Mom.
Hi, I'm Mary Kay, Jenna's mom, and I'm here to listen too.
And you're from what city?
Oh, Rancho Santa Margarita.
All right, Dr. Sunneburn. Are you there, Dr. Sunneburn?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So the main thing for me to say is that I sometimes sleep in the city of Orange. And also I'm in so many different groups that I ain't even gonna get started. I'm here to listen to what your candidate has to say.
Okay, great. Thank you for joining us. And I'm Jenna Beck. I'm the chapter leader for PDA South OC, and I host these meetings once a month. And we'll go over like some of the things that we do within this meeting as we go through the agenda. For those of you who are attending to hear Shahid, I don't say his name correctly, Shahid Buttar, I did tell him that the speakers generally start at 4:45. So do chapter business for the first 45 minutes. And then the speaker starts. So he'll probably be jumping on, and hopefully he won't have any entry issues. Like sometimes we do have people that struggle to actually get in. And then I think we also have Brenda Siegel's campaign manager is probably going to jump in as well and talk a little bit about her campaign at the end of the call. If you guys have any actions or things that you want to share with us, I reserve about 15 minutes at the end of the meeting for people to make announcements. So that's kind of how the format goes. All right, so let's jump back into, let me go ahead and share screen again. And let's see. Okay, so we just did introductions. All right, so it's going faster than it should. It's not supposed to do that. Can it just stop, please? All right, so Dr. Bill, do you want to pitch this?
I could, like my second favorite thing in the world. So thank you. I appreciate you started out with the pitch. So for those who are new to Progressive Democrats America, we've been around since 2004, and the Democratic Party in its infinite wisdom nominated John Kerry, of all people. I mean, at the time we were in a war we didn't want to be in. We were, just starting to talk about Medicare for all and single payer healthcare, on a national level and stuff. And so to all of the people who supported Dennis Kucinich or Howard Dean, even back in the days when he was a progressive like me, I was a Deaniac. We thought John Kerry was the absolute worst pick for a nominee. So we founded PDA, Progressive Democrats America. We've been going ever since. We had a wonderful national leader named Tim Carpenter, who had lived in Orange County for many years, who was one of the founders, if not the founder. But anyhow, we're still, our mission is still to elect a progressive Democratic majority. I mean, we're the Dem Enter organization because we think there are really only two effective political parties in this country in this day and age. One of them is wholly owned and operated by the corporate interests in America. The other one is the Democratic Party, and that one is divided. So we try to support all the progressive Democrats in Congress and running for office. That's our mission. We're not all Democrats, but we support the progressive Democrats. And that's why we founded Progressive Democrats America. And, you know, if that rings with you, if it has the sense of truth about it, then we appreciate your support. Because like any other national organization, we have a database, we have a little crew of people who do a whole lot of work with, you know, just using up all of their time and sweat equity. So all of that does cost some money, and we appreciate if you can donate. We have what we call our Change Makes Change program, which is a monthly donation. If you can kick in, you know, $5 a month, $10 a month, cost of one designer coffee at Starbucks a month will keep PDA with a budget that we can run on. So that's called our Change Makes Change. If you go to pdamerica.org and click on donate, pdamerica.org, I'll put it in the chat and donate. We appreciate it. That's the pitch. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. And I donate $5 a month. I do have a recurring donation.
Woohoo! Thank you.
Okay. So the next one is the other thing that we do on a monthly basis is we write letters to our congressional representatives. And this month, for June, we're focusing on these pieces of legislation. There is an email that that we get once a month. I think it's Michael Fox sends it out, that has links to where does your congressional rep stand on the issues. And this email, this address at the top here is where you can find the template letters. We customize the letters based on where our congressional reps stand on the issues. So we're either thanking them for their support, that they're supporting these pieces of legislation, or we are asking them to get behind it because it's so important. So this is what we're focusing on this month. And this is the address where you can get the template letters. And it's best if you write to the congressperson that you live in their district, because they're more likely to actually read it if you come from a zip code within their district. So it's a pretty simple thing to do. The letters are already written. You're just customizing it based on where your congressional rep stands on the issues. And this is the address that I can copy that and put that in the, well, can I put that in the chat? Oh, I should have taken it. That shouldn't have been on this one too, but.
I already put it in the chat.
Oh, you did. Thank you. Excellent. Excellent. Okay. So the next thing, continuing on volunteer opportunities is, and Ellen mentioned this as well, that you like to get involved in the local races, right? And there are some various local races. I have called out a few. So this obviously is not a comprehensive list, but these are some progressives that are running locally or fairly close to locally, and one from South Carolina, and I'll get to that in a minute. But Scott Reinhardt's running down here in Assembly District 73. He ran for Bernie delegate. I don't think he didn't get in as at large or anything, did he, Dr. Bill? I don't think he got in. Okay, yeah. So he ran this time. He also ran in 2016, and he has been running for assembly now for 2 cycles. He's doing much better this time around. He has a lot more name recognition, and the party's behind him, because behind our former chair, he did not have party support, and now he does have party support, and he has a really good campaign operation. And the political climate in Orange County is such that we could probably take this seat. So there are lots of phone banking opportunities and postcarding and things. And that is the web address to, if you want to help us flip a very red district, South Orange County, that would be super helpful. Now, Fatima, I attended her call yesterday. She is running in Assembly District 64, which covers Compton and Watts, y'all. So right now they have an assembly person who is taking a lot of oil money, and he is establishment embedded, and she's challenging as a progressive challenger. And she's got a great grassroots campaign. She's already gone through her primary. So it's her versus the establishment basically. And I haven't seen this race on a lot of people's radars. And it's a great district for us to take because I believe it's right next door to Anthony Rendon's district. So the more establishment people we pull out of that area, the more control over that network we can have. So definitely take a look at her race as well. She is also looking for, like, even if you can just donate, like if you can't do phone banking, but like if you could phone bank or text bank or do whatever you can for these campaigns, but even if you can just throw some money at them, because the money helps, right? And she does have, I think she has a fundraising goal right now of a couple $100,000 or something. I can't remember what it is exactly, but she needs to raise money because that dude is taking a ton of oil money and he's going to probably outspend her like 4 to 1 or more. Okay. Then this chapter is organizing right now with Melanie Nellen, who was hired into the Jamie Harrison campaign in South Carolina. Jamie Harrison is challenging Lindsey Graham for his Senate seat. We're doing text banking on Mondays and Thursdays. And what I'm doing is, because it's in the middle of the day for me, so it's like right in the middle of my workday, I am helping to recruit volunteers for this effort, and I'm doing trainings on Wednesday evenings to help people sign up and get ready to text bank for this campaign. She's also starting phone banking, I think, pretty soon, but right now the main focus is on text banking. So I put the link there. I don't know if your video box is covering up part of the link, but the link is on the slide. And I'll see if I can, when Shahid starts speaking, I'll see if I can go back and copy all these links and drop them into the chat. And then I just put a few different, these are not all the city council races going on in Orange County, but these are some that are down in the South. So in Irvine right now, we've got 2 people running for, oh, I forgot to put Farrakhan. I'm sorry, guys. So Farrakhan is running for mayor. And then for city council, we have Lauren Johnson Norris and Tammy Kim. And my apologies to Farah. I forgot that I needed to put that mayor's race on here too. James Bacon was on our call last month. He is considering running for San Clemente. So, and he's one of my volunteers. He's been attending our meetings and stuff. I don't know if he's on the call today, but he's been with us. Richard Hurt is running in Aliso Viejo. And I just found out on Friday, I think it was Friday, that Polly Hale is running for Mission Viejo. So that's a good one too. All right, how are we doing? I think I'm ahead of time right now, right?
Dana, just to add, I live in Huntington Beach, and Oscar Rodriguez, he's a Bernie Sanders supporter, is running for city council, just to let you guys know.
Yes, Oscar is running, and there's actually 2 other Democratic candidates who are also running, but I only remember their first names. I don't remember. That's why I didn't.
Yeah, it's Natalie Moser and Dan Kalmick. I'm not sure who they support or if they're progressive. I just know that Oscar's pretty progressive and a Bernie supporter.
Yes. Yeah. I know that they're all 3 of them are better than what Huntington Beach has right now. But yes, Oscar is actually a burner. So definitely true. Okay. Are there any other races out there that you guys wanted to talk about locally? Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Oh, not locally. So I noticed you got Jamie Harrison in, but there are several more kind of nationally, that really high profile progressives are challenging him. So, so like the race in Kentucky that was, what's his name, Booker?
Charles Booker, yeah.
Yeah, so very similar in Maine still is the challenger is Betsy Sweet, and she's challenging the corporate Democrat who, of course, is trying to unseat Susan Collins. But Betsy Sweet is a strong single payer supporter and advocate, and has been working for that at the state level, and of course she would at the national level. So that's in Maine. We've got for U.S. Senate in Colorado is Andrew Romanoff has a very good chance of beating Hickenlooper, who's just terrible. We booed him off the stage, when he said Medicare for all would never happen at the California Democratic Convention. So, back when he was a presidential candidate, so he doesn't deserve to be the nominee in Colorado for the U.S. Senate seat. They're going up against Cory Gardner. Andrew Romanoff is an absolute champion on Medicare for all. There's Eva Putsova is running for Congress in the northwestern corner of Arizona. Actually a huge district. She's been on the city council and Flagstaff, and it runs all the way down just west of Tucson in Arizona. So Eva is fantastic. She's a longtime PDA activist, and like I said, city council member in a college town, Flagstaff. So hopefully she'll get a lot of the students out to vote for her. They have a corporate Democrat that they need to get out of that seat in Arizona. Let's see, Alex Morse in Massachusetts. I think that still hasn't happened yet, where he's challenging Richard Neal. I think Richie Neal, who's like one of those guys who's like, very entrenched on the House. Well, which committee is that? Is it like Energy and Commerce, I think? Anyhow, so Alex Morse is definitely one that you want to help. And then Brenda Siegel, of course, and she's a good friend in Vermont that you had here in your meeting before. And she's running for Lieutenant Governor of Vermont. There's just a few there. Mike Fox will put you to work on any or all of them. If you go to Mike Fox at pdamerica.org, he will help you get dialing. You can make phone calls. Actually, they're very friendly calls. They're PDA members usually, and so we call other PDA folks to get them on the stuff that's going on in their areas. So thanks. Didn't want to hog that section.
No, that's great. And actually, Brenda's campaign manager is going to probably jump in towards the end of the call as well. So, okay, so that is this, like I said, it's not a comprehensive list, but these are just some of the ones that I'm kind of watching at this point. And obviously, like, there's only so much room you can put on, like, space on the slide. But there's definitely more out there. There's a lot more out there. Okay. What else? Oh, I guess I'm ahead of schedule. So let me see what I got. First of all, it's only 4:30, and I told him that we would probably talk for 45. Let me stop sharing the screen for a second. So we're going to have to wait for him to jump in. So we can talk about other things that are going on. First of all, this is what is it the 40th anniversary of the Stonewall riot? Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. 50th. Oh, right, because it would have happened before I was born. So, and you guys can unmute. There's only like 9 of us right now on the call. So if you want to unmute and just have like a free form conversation, on that note, one of the calls that I attended on Friday was hosted by Lauren Johnson Norris. And this actually, Spencer, is why I know about the other 2 candidates, because they were on that call. And they were spent a lot of time talking about the victory that they had at Irvine City Council it was a 4-to-1 vote to fly the pride flag over city council. So they won that, and it's kind of a big deal because Irvine has a long history of being fairly bigoted, right? So, so what do you guys have out there? What are your thoughts about, like, how do you, what can we do to advance more issues like that and to be more effective at creating tolerance, and especially in a climate like today in Orange County, right? And intersectional issues and things. And throw that out there. Jump in, please.
I saw, this was in Huntington Beach, a city councilor, Kimberly Carr, she's a Democrat. She did, I think, a local roundtable with like the police chief and maybe a few other city officials. And they talked about race and coming together in unity in Huntington Beach. And they invited different youth groups to attend. So I think kind of something like that, especially for younger people, trying to reach out with city council members and different organizations and really talking about what's affecting people in this day and age. I think that's a good start for sure. And I heard that was pretty successful. So I thought that's a good idea.
Anybody else?
Well, I just try to make an old pitch that's still going, that we can't just pose as spokespeople for the people that need our help. We really need to go to them. We really need to go and have them, encourage them to be active, rather than saying we're just the spokespeople for them. It's an old problem, and it's still with us pretty big.
Yeah, actually, on that, Dr. Sonnenberg, the call was co-hosted by the Lavender, I think it was Lavender, no, it wasn't the Lavender Dem Club, it was the LGBTQ caucus. Is that what they're called? The caucus, the state caucus? Because Aaron McCall was on the call.
Yeah.
So yeah, they definitely had like a large presence on that particular call, but you're absolutely right. I feel that way too about like what we're seeing with the whole George Floyd protests and the whole conversation right now around criminal justice reform, is that especially for those of us who are so white, like we need to like take a step back and listen and figure out how do they want us to support them, and like let them lead this movement and like support them in their actions, right? Because I've kind of complained about this online a little bit. I still see like a lot of white activists trying to be like the leading voices about what's happening over the last few weeks. And I think our best thing to do right now is to lift up the people of color who are taking the lead, right?
Yeah, we have to understand, well, it's being handled, but of course it centers on the Black Lives Movement. That's going great for the people to participate, but in that is also other people of color that are kind of just blended in. But especially in Orange County, we need to be concerned about Latinx, especially those that are hurting for survival and for making a living. So I just hope that somehow we can give voice to the people themselves that are really at stake here.
Yeah, I also agree with you, Jenna. I think the first thing a lot of white activists should be doing is stepping back and really looking at themselves and asking, okay, what can I do to help and what should I do? And for me, that kind of took place as being a peacekeeper at a lot of the rallies and protests that started up after the George Floyd murder. And I thought that was the best way I could help, with my time, and really just try to create a peaceful environment for people to speak and give their piece. And I have a Black brother, and he's told me that, you know, he feels emotionally drained. And I think that's kind of a common theme through a lot of people right now. And he just said, even saying, you know, I support you, I see you, I hear you, how can I help you? Even just small things like that is so important. And just making sure that we're elevating Black voices and people of color, it's super important right now.
Does anybody else want to share their experiences about going to any of these BLM protests, or how you've what you've done to support the community over the last few weeks?
But what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to share a podcast I did, because as far as being white allies, I think it's a good example. I have on the podcast a Black minister named Ira Dotson, and he was able to speak. I don't think that white people should be so uninvolved and in the background that we don't have any impact on anything. But at the same time, I think we should all step up. There's no room for people to step back. There's no room. Don't have a scarcity of leadership opportunities. No, everybody needs to step up. This is an opportunity for everybody to participate and not to hold back. But on this podcast, Ira, who's a Black man, he's most of the podcast. So this is an effort to lift up a voice of a Black person, but also I have another scholar in there who I think is Indian or East Asian, but also to participate ourselves and to be involved and to be active. There's no reason that we need to restrain our activism and hold back and not participate and not be involved and not lead. We need to be involved. So this, I think, is a good example of both lifting up Black peoples and being a white ally and not holding back and not keeping, it's exactly what, we don't want, which is white people not doing anything, not saying anything, just going on and not participating. If we want to put people away and push them in the back and say, don't say anything, don't be involved, don't do anything of any importance, then that's where then that's just the same thing that white people have done for years. So I don't see the purpose of people not standing up, raising their voices. That's what being an ally is. So I share that. If you haven't got a chance to listen to it, it's only a 29-minute podcast. It's really good. And so that's a good example of how to be a white ally.
Thank you. Dr. Bill?
Yeah, Rich, thanks for sharing that. Let me see if hopefully I can get to listen to that after this meeting. But I agree that stepping back, I think, just means stepping back from leadership, not participation. So yeah, we can't, as white people, we can't know actually what Black Lives Matter actually means the same way as Black people. So it's an existential threat that white people are privileged not to not to entertain in their lives. So I think, we know what existential threats are. We know that climate is an existential threat. We know that inadequate healthcare is an existential threat. We know that just being poor in this country is an existential threat. It'll throw you on the streets, and in which case you're twice as likely to die than if you have a shelter. So I think there's a wealth of activist community out there that we can all be a part of. This last weekend was the Poor People's Campaign had like a whole weekend thing, and the Reverend William Barber just gave the most outstanding speech. If you just go to Poor People's Campaign website, I'm sure they still have his speech from last Saturday. It was phenomenal. So I think we can participate. We can go to these things online. Some of us, like me, are too old to be going to protests right now, because I'm worried I'm going to come down with the virus and give it to other people and all that stuff. So So we're not doing, in the street protests and all of that. We're literally social distancing ourselves into confinement, but you can still be involved online. You can join these actions, these activities and events that are happening all around us. And I think that supports the effort. And at the same time, we have to work on the others economic and social justice issues and the peace and war issues, so like Green New Deal, for example, which includes college for all and jobs for all and Medicare for all, at the same time as we transition energy. It's like, you can't do one without the other. The PDA late founder Tim Carpenter used to say, you got to chew gum and walk at the same time. There's just no way to choose one or the other. And those of us who care enough to be in a meeting like this have it in our blood. So we're gonna be doing that stuff, and we shouldn't feel bad about doing it, about participating. But we do have to realize where we have kind of credibility for leadership or taking the back seat. We're still in the car, but we're in the back seat. Bad analogy.
Spencer?
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on what Rich said. I agree that, if you're a white person, now is not the time to be silent. You need to be speaking out against racism, police brutality, and all other injustices that are going on. The only thing really to worry about is that you're not asserting yourself to the point where it's like a white savior complex. But no, if you're white, absolutely, you need to be speaking out and saying what's wrong and how to help everyone else.
Jeanette?
I went to a march in Santa Ana. I think it was, I can't remember because time is blurry right now, but probably like 3 weeks ago. And it was awesome. All the protesters had masks on. And I think they did a follow-up study on if protesters were at a greater risk of contracting COVID, and they weren't, because we were observing the facial mask regulation. And then I went to 2 other ones, and it was just really great. And I do agree that white people have to stay in the background as support. You have no right to take over that conversation at all. You just need to be in the background, willing to support and get out there too, but no dialogue unless you're asked for it, because that's not your place.
Right, and that was kind of my point, was that when I say that there's, I've seen a lot of white activists sort of trying to take the lead on the conversation. A really good example of this is how over the last couple of weeks, we have been hearing more and more about defunding the police. And there have been a lot of white people who have tried to reframe that messaging and turn it into something that it isn't, and try and say that, oh no, they want to get rid of police departments entirely, when they actually are talking about defunding an organization, similarly to what Trump has done to the education department. He has defunded the education department. It still exists, but it has a much smaller budget than it did previously because he keeps tearing away at it. And that's what they're talking about doing, is taking the money that already exists in a budget and reallocating it to services that make more sense for an inner city. And I don't know if you guys saw this, but Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did a Q&A where she was asked, what does defunding the police look like? And she said, it looks like affluent white neighborhoods. It looks like affluent white neighborhoods. We have much smaller police forces. We invest in infrastructure. We invest in beautifying the city. We invest in our education and schools and everything else. And that's what they're talking about, is that right now, the police agencies in inner cities are responding to calls that they shouldn't have to respond to, right? That they're handling things that there should be other city departments that handle, like dog catching or like mental health services or things of that nature. And what they're saying is that if we demilitarize our police agencies in these larger inner cities, and we actually trust our citizens instead of harass them constantly with police people, and invest this money into other services, then we can improve the quality of life in the cities. And so when I say white people need to stop trying to take the lead on these conversations, that's exactly what I'm referring to, is that white people were immediately thrown off by them calling it defund the police, even though that is a very standard term for what you do when you're downsizing something. It's not, but they went to extremes trying to say, no, you can't do this. You can't do this, because there's so many people out there that just don't even understand the concept of it and try to reframe it and make it something that it wasn't, right?
Mhm. Well, I want to add to that it's not so much white people as it's propaganda. So what really happened was not that white people heard this defund the police and then all of a sudden they got all upset. No, what really happened was the media took that term, and in propaganda, we often have words turned into weapons and used against us. And so that's how it works. So once the media, the right-wing media primarily picked up on that, they ran with it. They started pushing it. And Trump immediately saw the value of to divide the country and divide people, and he immediately ran with it. And so what happens then is that's when white people get upset, right? And most of the time they're looking for something to support their the racist or anti-freedom, whatever you want to call it, their agenda. So they're looking for it already, and then it's fed to them, and then they respond. So so sometimes we look at it as, oh, white people are doing this, and then they have all this reaction. No, it's really, they're being told what to think, and they're just doing what they're told, and they're basically not thinking, period. You know? So, and I would add that there are no roles that are not leadership roles. Every role in a social movement is a leadership role. There's no role where we sit back and hang in the back and do nothing. There's only leadership roles. That's it, nothing else. So to say that we should not become leaders is to say we should not participate, because there is nothing other than leadership roles, and every movement needs to constantly be recruiting leaders. And if it does not recruit leaders, it will eventually die. So that's really the issue here. The rhetoric is really off on not of what actually the roles are in these groups. They're all leadership roles. So that's my feeling on it, that there is no such thing as a non-leadership role in a social movement. And so inevitably, in the end result, that means that to say people can't step up and be leaders in the social movement is to basically exclude them from the movement altogether.
I understand where you're coming from, but I think that's really high level. When I talk about there are times when we have to step back, I'm saying that there are also roles where you're a facilitator or you are the support person. You're helping to amplify somebody else's voice. You're helping to volunteer for their cause. You know, for example, we have candidates, right? And the candidate then has a campaign manager, and then has like a field director, and then has recruits volunteers. They have staffers. They have an organization, right? Not everybody can be at the top of the organization. Some of us are supporting the organization. And that's what I'm saying, is that we need to help propel their voices up in this movement and help them be successful in what they need to do, and not try and control that conversation for them. So when Black Lives Matter activists are out there organizing protests, it's our job to show up and say, how can I help you? What can I do to make this a successful event, right? And maybe that's me being a leader because I took the time out of my day to actually go there and help them, but I'm not actually trying to get credit or visibility for their work. You know what I mean? Do you understand what I'm saying, Rich?
Piggybacking off of
Yeah, kind of, but you know, I just not sure that you know, you have the definition of a support role, carrying water for people, and then the one leader. Well, obviously, I think that anybody and everybody who stands up for racial justice and who stands up to fight oppression and lifts up, in so doing, that's actually how you lift up the voice of minorities. That's how you do it. Who uses their privilege, not denies their privilege, but uses it for the purpose of raising up the lowly, of defeating oppression. I don't think that should be stopped at all, nor inhibited, nor discouraged by anybody.
Jessica?
I was going to say, piggybacking off of what you said, Jennifer, I think it's a matter of respect and sort of humility of like, this movement is a movement for justice for sure, but it's a movement for a specific justice. And I personally don't fall in that group, not because I wouldn't be willing to have or anything, but just by an accident of birth. And therefore it is not my place to direct it or co-opt it or step on toes. It's my place to, and I think all of our places, to follow the lead of the people who are most impacted. And I think there is a distinction in that regard of who should be the leaders and who should be the support network. And it was the same on Bernie's campaign. A lot of people wanted it to be run different ways. Maybe even I wanted it to be run different ways at different times. But the fact is, it was Bernie's campaign and he sets the tone, right? And we can all say maybe he didn't do it the right way. But if you're trying to help a specific goal, you need to follow the leaders of that movement. And I think it's a matter of respect and humility.
Okay, I'm going to take one more, and then I also saw that Shahid just joined the call. So we'll go one more with Spencer, and then I'm going to, oh, by the way, Shahid, we are recording this meeting and we're broadcasting to Facebook. So thank you so much for joining us. I'll give you a minute to collect your thoughts while Spencer is wrapping us up.
Sounds good, thanks.
I just wanted to reiterate kind of what you said, Jenna. What's really important right now is not co-opting or changing the messaging. So for example, defund the police. I live in Huntington Beach, and for probably the most conservatives who live around here, they think about that term and just think, oh my goodness, it scares them so much. But all we can do is try to create a clear definition and help explain what that means. But I don't think it's our place at all to try to change that messaging or terminology. And I've been guilty about that, trying to think like, okay, what's a better, easier way to try to portray this message that's more friendly? But I think as long as we create clear definitions and help support the leaders who are behind this, then that's really what we should be doing right now. And, you know, explaining we're allocating resources to other areas that need those resources that have been neglected. So it's really important to just kind of lift up the Black voices in this movement and come together and say, okay, we're all here to help. How can we help?
Great, thank you. Great discussion, everybody. Okay, so we have our guest of the hour with us today. So we have Shahid Buttar, who is challenging Nancy Pelosi for the congressional seat up in San Francisco. This would be a huge win for us. This would be a very strategic win for us. So I'm going to give Shahid the floor to talk about his campaign, to talk about the issues that matter in your district and nationally. We've got a good 45 minutes that you can.
Oh, okay.
And so if you want to save some time for Q&A or whatever, I'm going to put you on speaker view. And if everyone could mute during Shahid's discussion until we get to Q&A. All right, there you go.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And I'm so glad to be with you all this evening. I'm grateful for the time on your agenda and looking forward to your questions. I am also grateful, particularly I see Dr. Bill here, so thank you for your work in the movement. I cite it often, and I'm grateful to stand alongside you. I'm running to replace Pelosi in San Francisco. I'm the first Democrat that she's ever faced in a November election, and with your support, I hope to make this her last November election. The jungle primary in California affords opportunities for campaigns like ours to hold accountable entrenched incumbents in areas of the state that are very committed to one party. And having beaten the Republican for second place this spring, we have a foot in the door. Now, I want to make a couple of things clear. On the one hand, we have a lot of ground we have to cover. We came in the March primary at 13%. We'd hoped to be closer to 25. And Pelosi she mounted a pretty vigorous late in the cycle campaign, paid Facebook ads, cable television ads, earned media in the district, glad handing in the district. She kind of turned out all the stops, mailers across the city. And so that's part of what held us to 13. She likely will do all that again. She's spending, I think, something like $100,000, I think several $100,000 a week on Facebook ads at the moment. And we're not going to be able to match that. She outspent us 15-1 in the primary. And that notwithstanding, we've raised $1 million for the campaign. We've recruited staff from Bernie's senior leadership team. We've got thousands of volunteers, and we're making thousands of phone calls a week. With the pandemic in place, it does force our campaign particularly to leverage volunteer support to reach voters on the phones. We can't knock on doors. We can't do mobilizations or events without putting people at risk. So the phone banking operation, which is very much volunteer led, is a critical leg of the stool. I can talk a little bit about some of the endorsements that we've gotten, and then maybe I'll get into the issues. I think the issues will be familiar to all of us. The reason why we need to replace Nancy Pelosi in the House ultimately is because our species is getting kicked off a cliff, and the future needs someone to defend it. And corporate rule is killing us. It has been killing us. It was killing us even before the pandemic, and the climate catastrophe ensures that it will continue to kill us until we shrug off its yoke. And that's an invitation that we were offered at any number of points in the past. Senator Bernie Sanders offered it in the presidential race. Dr. Martin Luther King articulated it many years before that. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt had a not dissimilar vision. We have deeply rooted in American history a tradition of wanting, alongside the vicious and racist tradition that we see exemplified by our criminal president, there is also a tradition of Americans seeking to do right by our neighbors. It's the tradition of the freedom riders who went south in the civil rights era, and many of them lost their lives in acts of solidarity. It's the tradition of I'm thinking of the Presente movement. These are Latin American solidarity activists from the West Coast, many of them older activists of faith who have put their bodies on the line in defense of human rights principles abused by our own domestic and international military industrial complex. It's that same tradition that I see exemplified by teachers and nurses. The public service ethos that is equally embedded in our national consciousness is one that we can embrace and vindicate. And I see that opportunity afforded, if not in the presidential race, at least in down ballot races, and I'm proud to be among them. Medicare for all and establishing universal health care is a species-wide exigency, particularly in an era of a contagious pandemic. We have pretended for too long that healthcare is a consumer good, a commodity, and it makes absolutely no sense. It's not just vicious to commit ourselves to for-profit predatory healthcare. It is senseless and stupid, because in an age of a contagious pandemic, your neighbor's health impacts your own, which is why we have to treat public health like a public good. That's what universal healthcare, Medicare for all does. Climate justice, just as critical and imperative. We see an entire generation of policymakers who have turned a blind eye and a deaf ear to the needs of a generation that is clamoring for the right simply to survive, and entire other generations that might not have the chance to survive if we don't manage to get a grip on our own political system. Now, all this brings me back to what I would describe as sort of like the, looming elephant, let's say, in the room, which is a not, unfortunate or not, it's an appropriate metaphor, because we're talking here about the extent to which our democracy answers to we the people. And this is a structural issue that impacts not just the healthcare debate, not just the climate justice debate, not just the racial justice debate and the police accountability debate. This is the very structure of our democracy. And ultimately, the reason I'm running to replace Nancy Pelosi in the House is that for 10 years, I've been a civil liberties advocate, and I have watched authoritarianism emerge, and I have watched it grow increasingly entrenched and bipartisan during the 20 years that I've been a lawyer. And I've pulled all the levers I can on the outside. I've organized coalitions at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level. I've won policies at the local level, the state level, and the federal level. I've done direct action. I've done mutual aid. I've started nonprofits. I've led national nonprofits. I've launched programs for prolific national nonprofits. I've done work in the courts to establish human rights that did not before exist, particularly marriage equality. I'm proud of the work I did then, very early in the movement. We celebrated an anniversary today on the anniversary of the Stonewall riots. here in San Francisco, they were preceded by 3 years by the riots at Compton's cafeteria. And I'm so proud of our city and the role it played in promoting marriage equality and the right of consenting adults to marry a partner of their choice across the country. It's not often that I have an opportunity to praise the Roberts Court, but the Obergefell decision in 2015 is among the few decisions of the Roberts Court by which I'm frankly elated. And I made this point recently, it's unstable like any court-created right, just like Roe. We can't satisfy ourselves with court-created rights because they are unstable and they are at risk, as very much the reproductive liberty rights that were at issue at Roe and Planned Parenthood versus Casey, the very same rights that the right wing is running roughshod over. And similar with, I should say here, the complicity of corporate Democrats, particularly including Nancy Pelosi. She's made endorsements in the last electoral cycle supporting reproductive authoritarians in both Texas and Illinois against young progressive challengers of color who favor reproductive liberty and justice. And the idea that Nancy Pelosi is willing to stand behind reproductive authoritarianism, not just government surveillance and detention and torture and arbitrary police violence, but the most, I think of the government control over a woman's body as like the most heinous violation of a liberty principle that that we could see as a systematic policy. We're talking about half of the human race here, right? Being denied control over their own bodies. It's as fundamental a liberty interest and as widespread a class as you could fathom. And half our political system seems to concede that somehow it's a legitimate locus for government control. And of course it's not, but the idea that we are resting all of our hopes on a Supreme Court decision, given the composition of the court now, is an invitation to disaster. We need to shore up these rights through policy executed through the other branches. That's another thing that I'm eager to do. So those are some of the issues at play. I'll share just a little bit about myself to the extent folks are interested. I'm an immigrant to the United States. My family came here when I was 2 years old from England. My blood's from Pakistan. Our intergenerational story is very much one that frankly drives me to office in the sense that I am a child of the military industrial complex. I would not be in the United States if the pattern of military rule subverting democracy in the country that my parents came from were not firmly well established with US support. And with the privilege of having been raised here in the Imperial Center and the chance to have studied and taught at Stanford Law School and worked with nonprofits like the Electronic Frontier Foundation and the American Constitution Society that I have, those opportunities have afforded me any number of privileges, and I've had lots of opportunities to redeploy those in the service of the movement. The marriage equality cases in 2004, when I had a chance to represent Mayor Jason West from New Paltz, New York, is one that, again, that I refer to today, it being the anniversary of the Stonewall riots and Pride weekend. I'm proud to have seen our movement establish new human rights that did not before exist, even in a time that I think we all would acknowledge as a relatively dark one in US history. The last 20 years have not been one marked by very broad progress, but we did win rights there. I'll note here also that Democrats, the mainstream institutional wing of the Democratic Party, was not with us in 2004 when that movement became very prolific. It took Speaker Pelosi 10 years with all of the institutional power and privilege of the Speaker of the House to show up to accept the equal rights of my neighbors. And this was my first case out of law school. I had no power or privilege. I was a young associate at a law firm. I met Jason, my client, speaking on a panel at an anarchist conference about art and activism. He was talking about making puppets for street demonstrations, and I was talking about organizing hip hop artists and spoken word artists for basically proto-Occupy actions, reclaiming public space using performance as a vehicle to promote. At the time, we were really focused on trying to stop the war. So it was very much anti-war was the sort of like movement that we were, at least that I was conceptualizing that mode of activism in. And I had a chance at that era to establish politicized collectives of performance artists in 3 different cities across the United States: Washington, DC, here in San Francisco, and one in Palo Alto. They're all still active today, 17 years later. I'm very proud of that, and all of the artists that have come through those collectives. I feel like I'm getting tired of hearing myself talk now, so I will leave it at that. I'm really eager to invite your questions, and yeah, I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much again for the chance to address you this evening.
Hi, Shahid. This is Jenna. So what would you say, what's your biggest challenge right now? I know that obviously she's got a lot of money, right?
Hmm.
But you have grassroots momentum. So what would you say is like, what is your winning strategy? What's your biggest challenge and what do we need to do to support you?
Okay, those a lot of questions at the end. I want to get to those. So, what was the biggest challenge was one, and then you threw some others in there. Can you run those by me again? I was getting ready on that one, and then I got lost when the other.
It's kind of a strategy question. Like how can we best help without totally giving up your strategy? Obviously, I don't want you to do that.
Oh, I'll be public. Yeah. Strategy. Yeah. So what's our challenge and what's our solution? Maybe it sounds like is the question you're asking me. So the biggest challenge in our race is that Nancy Pelosi is the head of the Democratic Party and exercises control through a mix of carrots and sticks. She turns screws and coerces, which is to say there are any number of people in the party who can't support me even though they want to or do. Like, for instance, half the board of supervisors has voted for me. I know that because they've told me, but they can't say it publicly because each of them, frankly, is intimidated by the fact that she is the head of the national party. And so that chilling effect across even ranks of my supporters who have feet in the institutional establishment, that's a very real challenge because it, at the same time that I'm supported by people across the establishment and the grassroots, it's really only the grassroots people who feel at liberty to say it, right? So like that's a challenge. A further challenge I would note here is simply name recognition. She is a viral name every news cycle. She is part of it, and she's been in politics for 30 years. So the sheer weight of her name and the recognition of it is in itself, to some extent, I would say it's like an electoral cliff. It's the thing that has insulated her for so long. Now, attendant to that, I want to particularly just make explicit one subtext here that I'm pressing on. There is a false construction of Nancy Pelosi's legacy that much of the body politic has been sold and internalized. Corporate media, as I think we've all known, spins any number of narratives. One of them is that Nancy Pelosi is a lion of the left, and it's not true at all. We've talked a little bit about it, from being an impediment to universal health care, to being an architect of mass surveillance, from being frankly, an authoritarian in policy. She's part of the continuing cover-up over CIA torture. She actively enforces executive secrecy and undermines congressional independence to maintain and commit to oversight responsibilities. She's herself is a former chair of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, so very much beholden to the intelligence establishment. There's never been a war that she hasn't been a cheerleader of. You know, she is very much a right-wing Democrat. And most people who don't pay close attention to politics have no idea. They only think of her as the anti-Trump because she is the name that gets said by the media as supposedly his antithesis, even though, and this gets back to our strategy, ultimately is to educate the electorate about how much she has empowered and enabled our criminal president at every turn, from showing up late, a year late, for an impeachment process that she then scuttled by artificially limiting to be confined only to an instance of foreign interference in a US election. When, and I said that, I'm not saying this is a Monday morning quarterback, 6 months before she showed up, I wrote an article shared by our nation's leading authority on constitutional law, Lawrence Tribe. It was probably the most widely read thing I've ever written in my 20 years. And it said, we have to impeach this president. This is when Pelosi saying we would not do it. And we have to impeach this president specifically for corruption. It is his violations of the emoluments clause. That's the constitutional prohibition on self-enrichment at public expense. That was the ground that would have brought him down, because that doesn't just offend Democrats. Conservatives hate the idea of their tax dollars being taken. And if the impeachment saga was a recitation of the litany of ways in which our criminal president continues to steal from you and your families, that would offer the opportunity to unlock some votes in the Senate from even among GOP senators. Nancy Pelosi ensured that would not happen by artificially limiting the process. Now, the same day that the House announced the impeachment process, she also supported Trump's corporate international trade agreement that undermines environmental protections and labor protections around the world. This, of course, after she funded his concentration camps at our nation's borders, imposed conservative pay-go rules on an otherwise progressive Congress. We see time and time again the not just failures of a weak progressive the active acts of either a complicit or co-opted conservative leading the Democratic Party. And ultimately, that's the challenge before our campaign, is to educate the electorate in the face of, frankly, 30 years of corporate propaganda and misinformation. So that obviously that's the challenge. Now, the strategy to it is multi-tiered. One strategy of it relates to mobilizing social networks. I just actually got here to my computer from an event in the Bayview. It's one of San Francisco's last remaining Black neighborhoods. There was a Juneteenth celebration organized by a number of groups in the community, and we're very present in communities, not just communities of color in the city, but also communities of resistance. Mobilizations around climate justice, for instance, police accountability, have found me and our campaign very visible participants going back years now. And the networks that inform and comprise those social movements, frankly, were the beginnings, the earliest base of our campaign. In addition to that kind of engagement of social movements, there's a traditional field outreach strategy, knocking on doors. Before the pandemic, we've shifted very much to the phones in the wake of it. So we're making over 5,000 phone calls a week at the moment. We have hundreds of volunteers, actually over 1,000 at this point, who've trained with us. Hundreds are active at any given point in time. We'd very eagerly welcome any of you to join us. When I'm done talking, I'll type the link into the chat, but for anybody who's listening, it's shahid.fyi/volunteer. We'd love to include you and any friends. When we were making phone calls for Bernie, we often only had a handful of weeks, and we usually had a lot of territory to cover, as vast as entire states. And one thing I just note for people with respect to the viability of our race, we only need to cover one city, and we still have 4 months to do it. We have hundreds of people already, and we're getting dozens of signups a day. So at the pace we're moving, with the time we have left, I have a great deal of confidence that we can score what will be the biggest political upset in the history of the United States. And I want to make clear here, not beyond the theater of the upset, just what can happen when we remove Pelosi. We're all familiar with the horrifying consequences of bipartisan corporate rule across climate justice, militarism, the racism apparent in our prison industrial policing slavery system. The attendant set of horrors that bipartisan consensus on corporate rule enables, they are all driven by the co-optation of the Democratic Party. If we unlock an actual opposition party of the sort, frankly, the Democrats were when they were at least attached and affiliated with labor through the New Deal era, and arguably through the Great Society, there is a huge opportunity here to vindicate principles that haven't had expression in the electoral institutional arena in decades, right? President Franklin Delano Roosevelt proposed 100 years ago a second Bill of Rights to ensure human rights to education, healthcare, housing, food, basic needs. We can have that. There's no reason we haven't had it except for the co-optation of our major parties. If we knock out the chief fundraiser among the corporate Democrats, the strongest one among them, I would invite you to consider a couple of things. One, what is the message that sends to the rest of them, right? There are others who would attempt to step into her shoes, but none of them can. She is the leading fundraiser among them. And when the strongest among the corporate Democrats gets taken down by an immigrant with a long beard and a, unusual hairstyle, I suppose, I get a lot of comments about it. What is the message that's going to send to the institutional Democratic Party? It's pretty simple. The message is either show up for your constituents, or we will show you the door, because you, the corporate Democrats, couldn't even protect the strongest among you. And I'll make this point too. If Nancy Pelosi represented Dallas, Texas, or maybe where I grew up, St. Louis, Missouri, I would probably be a little less offended by it, the fact of her representation and how it diverges from the city's interests. But this is San Francisco. I didn't come here in my 20s to study law for no reason. I came here because this was the epicenter of, frankly, our nation's counterculture. It's a mecca of the peace and justice movement. It's a home of the environmental movement. It's been a convergence of people seeking liberation from the norms of other places, from LGBTQ folks to artists to immigrants from, frankly, around the world. San Francisco has a very unique culture, and it has been entirely co-opted by a voice promoting Wall Street first for the last generation. And it's not just the case that our city has lacked representation on the national stage, I think our national decision-making has suffered as a result by not having San Francisco's voice included. If we had someone in Washington fighting for marriage equality before the Supreme Court showed up for it, how much earlier might we have gotten it? If we had someone in Washington fighting for human rights instead of covering up CIA human rights abuses, how much further might we be down the road of actually ensuring an equitable, humane future for everyone? If we had a voice in Washington who would stand with the movements for peace and justice, as I have in the streets and in jail cells, instead of funding Bush's wars and enabling Trump's international belligerence and delaying impeachment of Trump and, forestalling it entirely over the Bush administration, where it was also deserved. Each of these examples, are proof points. And, between the door knocking, the phone calls, the relational organizing, there's a whole other component that we're pursuing in terms of basically inviting supporters to connect us to their respective friend networks. This is a strategy that we're importing from Bernie 2020 that the recent hires that we've brought from his campaign have enabled. That to some extent connects with your strategy question. You were asking what's our strategy to winning. Part of it is bringing in folks who've done work like this at very high levels in the past. So our recent additions to our campaign staff include 3 different field organizers from Bernie 2020, major state data director from his campaign, senior person from his national fundraising team, and together with actually a number of other people who've also joined the team, including a dozen interns at the junior level, that it's very much a hive, and we're moving faster and faster every day. At this point, we have substantial audiences online, much bigger, frankly, than it's kind of beyond my wildest dreams at this point already. There are tens of thousands of people who receive our emails. There are tens of thousands of people who we reach on each of the social media platforms, hundreds of thousands on some of them. And I'll just say that, for me as a candidate, it's been a very humbling experience because I'm auditioning to represent a single city in the national legislature. And when I set out doing that, I had anticipated very much riding the wake of Senator Bernie Sanders' trail. I ran to be a lieutenant for him in the House and to help empower his vision. He has 50 years of receipts fighting on the front lines of our movement. I don't have that longevity, but I have 20 years of receipts. And I do very much aspire to emulate his example. And with him off the field, I didn't anticipate being on the field without him on it. And at the same time that it's disappointing, and frankly, I'll be honest with you, the slide is a bit terrifying because I recognize the forces and the magnitude of them that we're up against. I also recognize very much that there is a movement afoot that he helped unleash that we're all a part of. And I took his invitation in 2016. He said, run for the offices, mob up on the establishment, storm the barricades. That's what I'm doing. And when he went off the field, at the same time that I'm seeking the chance to represent San Francisco and Washington, I've already sort of stumbled into this opportunity I could never have, frankly, even imagined to be among the voices of our movement. And I'm grateful for that opportunity. I'm particularly recognize one piece I want to draw out of Not Me, Us. It's a thing from Bernie that I particularly have been inspired by and hope to carry forward in our campaign for lots of reasons, not the least of which it insinuates where I would say the action is at, where the legitimacy inheres, where the sovereignty attaches, and that is in the us with a capital U. And as a person, to some extent, riding the wave of a movement, I'm very aware that it is the us that propelled Bernie. It's the us that propelled AOC. It's the us that put Jabal Bowman over Elliot Engel this last week. It's the us that's going to put us over Pelosi. The us cannot be stopped. We are the people of the United States. And I'm grateful to be among the voices.
It looks like Dr. Deal has a question for you.
Oh, please.
Well, if it's from me, what else could it be about? But Medicare for all. So, I do want to say that San Francisco and even the Bay Area does not have, as pristine a history of progressivism as we often ascribe to it. like, for example, not just Nancy Pelosi, but her good friend Dianne Feinstein and Barbara Boxer and Jerry Brown, who got decidedly, unprogressive when he ran for governor in the second series of governorships that he had. They all turned their backs on the progressive movement and basically sold their souls to corporate interests. I mean, when we had single payer for California, in the legislature this last term, shelved by Anthony Rendon, everyone in the movement knew that it was Jerry Brown, who didn't do anything without the sign from Nancy Pelosi, and tell him we cannot allow this to go forward in California. I'm sure of that, and that's because the function of the speaker is to funnel money into those districts where they can't raise the big bucks to oppose, corporate Republicans. But on the other hand, I think as a strategy, what Bernie Sanders has proven is that you can be quite viable, get very close to, if not even win, as in the case of AOC, by opposing money with people. So if we have enough people, and I know you've got some diehard PDA San Francisco fans up there, and in the Oakland area as well, who are working on your campaign, and like you said, you got months to go. I hope you have a nonstop series of events focused on, Medicare for all and the climate emergency, because that's what's on people's minds. And that can, I think, dethrone these monarchs like Nancy Pelosi, even, despite all the money that all the money in China that she could build up to oppose you. And you probably know, maybe everyone else doesn't, that now with the delegates for Bernie Sanders going to the convention, at least there's a movement afoot called Pass the Damn Bill, which is hashtag Pass the Damn Bill, which refers to HR 1384, the National Medicare for All bill. And you do have a champion in Northern California, that's Ro Khanna. And Ro, as you know, this morning was selected co-chair for the entire delegation going to the convention. So we are, PDA is advocating that Medicare for all, of course, be put into the national platform at this point, and telling Pelosi to pass the damn bill. I mean, we have 118 co-sponsors on HR 1384. Usually need about 100 for it to go through committee. What's the damn holdup on the damn bill at this point? So we're in this battle, alongside with you to push her out, because if she says she can't be for it, it's like any Democrat right now who can't be for Medicare for all might as well just call themselves a Republican.
I absolutely agree. And there's a couple different points that your comments raised for me: events, endorsements, and policy. I'll try to take those in reverse order. Just policy first. There have been at least 4 different areas over the course of the campaign where the pressure that we've presented has basically forced Speaker Pelosi to abandon previous positions and embrace new ones. That's happened on labor rights with the Protecting Right to Organize Act, which she embraced despite initially opposing. It's happened with congressional war powers, where after she opposed one by Ro Khanna, who you mentioned, and another by Barbara Lee, these were proposed amendments to the Defense Authorization Act that would have stopped President Trump's international belligerence, particularly vis-a-vis Iran. Pelosi opposed those amendments, and then after the passage of the NDAA, it was basically like, it was something to the effect of just kidding, and then embraced after the fact amendments that were not nearly enough to get the horses back in the proverbial barn. And then there was another issue here with respect to saving the post office. That was a call that she declined, only to then ultimately accept. And then finally, impeachment, which she refused for a year to show up for. And even if she did undermine the process when she did finally show up, she did feel compelled ultimately to show up. So on each of those issues, I've seen her campaign respond, abandoning previously established positions in the face of the pressure that we've again presented. And if she has any hope of holding on to her seat, it is by passing that bill. And if Medicare for all is the price for her to stay in Congress, I will happily call that a victory, right? I mean, I am here for the movement. And frankly, I think our campaign, because of who we present and the particular impediment that she presents to anything useful happening in Congress, we present one of the longest levers in federal politics. And again, I'm grateful to be an agent of impelling her to show up for work in that way. So that's just a little bit on policy. I want to press on endorsements. You talked about the networks that are supporting our campaign and the events that we'd be doing if there weren't a pandemic to flex on these issues. Before the pandemic, we were hosting very frequent events, from marches, rallies, protests, teach-ins, happy hours, recreational events. My favorite event of the campaign to this point was prompted by a very unfortunate event. Let me just share that story, and then I'll get into some of the endorsements. There was 2 months ago, I came home on a Saturday evening to discover from my neighbors that an off-duty FBI agent had shot an unhoused person on my block about 200 feet from my front door. And thankfully, the young man survived. And there were 3 meetings that happened in the next 2 weeks. One of them was by the Homeless Youth Alliance, a nonprofit in the neighborhood, basically holding space for other people in the unhoused community to effectively share their feelings of terror, because every one of them, they have no walls, right? And if an FBI agent is walking around the hate shooting people randomly, none of them feel safe. And it was very illuminating for me to hear their testimony and understand their voices and where they were coming from. The second meeting was local leaders, including our DA's office, the police department's office, elected members of the board, including the socialist representative on our board, supervisor who represents me, Dean Preston. And all of them shared our concerns in the community and made the point that as local leaders addressing an issue of federal abuse, there was effectively nothing that any of them could do about it. And the third meeting, we convened with a local group, Cop Watch. We catered it, brought in the survivor's family. They addressed the group publicly. They FaceTimed in the survivor from his hospital bed, who addressed the community directly. Everyone walked out of that meeting, signed up for counter surveillance shifts with the Cop Watch group, not of the FBI, of the SFPD, because those are the people with the badges in our community. But showing up for the community, trying to create space for community empowerment as a vehicle to the campaign's aspirations to represent the city in Washington. That's the kind of campaign that we're running here. A couple of days ago, I was attending a virtual press conference with some folks in Hunters Point. I mentioned before the Bayview and Hunters Point are the sort of like last Black enclaves of San Francisco. And Hunters Point is the site of one of the worst cases of environmental racism in our country. Some of the highest breast cancer and asthma rates in the world are in this neighborhood that was poisoned by the Navy for 50 years. It's the site where they built the nuclear bombs that were then tested in the South Pacific during the Second World War. And it's an entire neighborhood where they've now started building housing on radioactive soil. And, people occasionally ask me, what are we going to do here in San Francisco if we lose our very powerful voice in Congress to a neophyte like you, who's going to enter Congress as a backbench freshman? And I usually say to them, Hunters Point could have really used a powerful member of Congress at some point in the last 20 years to show up for that community. And so happens that we have a powerful member of Congress. It's in her district, hasn't done that community a great deal of good. So that's just a little bit about, events and kind of the way we have shown up with events. The pandemic takes a little wind out of that sails. We are still very active, again, where we can be. I just came from this Juneteenth event with the Black Lives Matter protest. We've been very visible and active in those as well. I want to press on endorsements because you raised a little bit about some of the networks supporting our campaign. So I just want to make these explicit. PDA San Francisco has endorsed our campaign, as has DSA San Francisco and DSA chapters around the state, including Fresno, Ventura County, Our Revolution chapters in the East Bay, Contra Costa County, Minneapolis, Minnesota, a number of other groups and communities, including Left Flank Vets. These are veterans against wars, the San Francisco Tenants Union, the League of Pissed Off Voters. Some of the individuals who've endorsed our campaign include several Bernie surrogates, including Dr. Cornel West, Sean King, Linda Sarsour, Ramesh Srinivasan, also a number of other prominent national leaders in the movement, including Medea Benjamin, the co-founder of Code Pink, Women for Peace, Jason West, my former client, who the second mayor in the country to recognize the right of consenting adults to marry a partner of their choice. Lawrence Lessig, the internet law and political corruption luminary at Harvard Law School. He was one of my first bosses. I was his teaching assistant when I was still in law school at Stanford 20 years ago. Some of the other folks who've endorsed us include Mike Gravel, Marianne Williamson. I could go on. Matt Gonzalez, who was the former president of our board of supervisor here, and Eric Marr, who was on the board. The surrounding array of communities that these people represent is a big part of the change strategy too, because as we reach out to our different networks, I think a lot of people look to these local voices and these national voices for leadership and inspiration, and the opportunity for their supporters to be pointed in our direction is one that I'm very grateful for. And maybe I'll just share a vignette with respect to endorsements, because it's a story I've heard that people seem to respond well to, and I love telling it. And some morning in February, maybe March, I woke up and I was reading a story in the New York Times mentioning me in the context of Bernie Sanders getting a phone call from Christine Pelosi. This is Nancy Pelosi's daughter. And this is the person who the Pelosi's want to put in her seat to wield it for another generation after Nancy's gone. You know, they're building a family legacy that includes Gavin Newsom, you know, includes former mayors of East Coast cities and members of Congress. So Christine calls Bernie Sanders to complain that Susan Sarandon endorsed our campaign. And so I'm sitting in San Francisco reading a paper in New York about someone in San Francisco calling someone in Vermont about someone in Los Angeles endorsing me. And I would just like Christine or Nancy or whoever to show up for a debate. It's been 30 years since Nancy Pelosi defended her record in public. And on the one hand, I don't blame her, because her record can't be defended. And on the other hand, she's either going to show up to defend it, or I'm going to take her seat. And frankly, I'm going to take her seat either way, because if she shows up to defend it, it can't be defended. If she doesn't show up to defend it, I think that the district might find that alarming. And the degree of entitlement implicit in refusing to defend one's record as a public official, in my mind, is disqualifying. And to see her daughter waging this backdoor campaign against Bernie because of something that Susan did, I just thought was the most juvenile, ridiculous, sophomoric, frankly, foolish, a little bit like, I don't want to, you know, I guess maybe I'm kind of past that point. I was just going to say schoolyard, you know, we're adults here, like grow up and show up for a debate. And I'm very much looking forward to that. I'll close with this invitation. If anybody wants to see that debate happen, one way to make it happen is we're inviting people to post to social media profiles, particularly tagging the San Francisco Chronicle or KQED, it's our NPR affiliate here, and say, I'm looking forward to the debate so I can hear about the choice between Pelosi and the first Democratic challenger that she's ever faced. Our website, if people want to check out more about my background or our issues or get involved, we'd love to invite you as a volunteer or a contributor, or if you have skills that you want to contribute, we'd love to have you. You can visit shahidforchange.us. And again, I'm so grateful. I had a chance when I was in Washington the first time to work with Tim Carpenter, the founder of PDA, in the mid 2000s. This was like circa 2005 to 2008 before I came back to San Francisco. And it's gratifying to me to see where the network has come in the years since, and particularly gratifying as a candidate to have a chance to address you. So thank you for the forum and all the work you're doing. And I'm happy to linger for more questions if people have them, but I also want to respect your time.
I don't see any hands up, but I do have a question. Well, actually, I have a statement and then I have a question. Okay. In regards to what you were saying about how she isn't addressing her district, and I don't know if you remember, but right after Trump was inaugurated, I think it was Dianne Feinstein tried to do town halls up and down the state, and she was getting booed and heckled. That's probably, Nancy did something as well. And I don't know if you remember this. It was about 3 years ago. There were protesters that approached her in a public forum, mad at her only fighting for dreamers and not for everyone. Right. And so she recently we had like some win at the Supreme Court, and she took credit for that and stuff. But I would say, okay, well, let's look back 3 years ago at that footage of all those protesters who were mad that she was approaching this with an incrementalist view of, we're only going to save the kids, we're not going to save everybody. But my actual question—
Can I lend one just piece of color there? If I remember correctly, the exchange between the people, if this is the same event I'm thinking of, included the participants saying to her, "You lie," and her responding to them on the microphone, you don't know what you're talking about. And I found that exchange to be a
Yes.
revealing indication of where we, the people, are vis-a-vis our Speaker of the House.
Yes, that's exactly what happened. That's exactly the footage I'm thinking of. She looked completely tone deaf when during that altercation. But so my question to you, I know there was a lot of excitement generated by Bernie and his campaign. A lot of people did hope that they'd be able to ride the Bernie wave, right? And then we had the surprise victory with AOC, which with Alexandria, it wasn't so surprising for people who actually took a look at the race, because they knew that there was a very low voter turnout in that district. They knew Crowley wasn't doing anything. He didn't really actually campaign. I don't think he even lived in the district, and he certainly didn't have a relationship with his constituents. So she was able to really sneak attack him. So what would you say are the similarities between that upset and the differences between that upset and what you would like to accomplish today?
Great question. So first, just to set the stage, in 2018, I ran for this seat in the very, very same cycle as Ocasio-Cortez on a very similar platform. I got as many votes as she did in the primary here in San Francisco after 3 months of campaigning. And we did it through very similar methods. It was pounding pavement. It was house parties. We probably had 36 of them in those 3 months. And then just to compare now to then, in the last week, we've raised as much money for our campaign as it took me those 3 months to do in 2018. So, where you can see the acceleration from that baseline. In terms of the similarities between our campaigns, I would say, we're both socialists of color. She's a young socialist. I'm a middle-aged socialist. I got enough gray in my beard to cover, several of us. I think people often mistake me for being a little bit younger than I am. I'm 45 for what that's worth. But still, relative to the generation of policymakers who we are running to replace, certainly relatively young in that context. So there's a similarity there. There is a very almost diametric, I don't want to say opposition, but difference with respect to the district. You'd notice that New York's 14th congressional district is historically a very low turnout district. And we have here in San Francisco a very high turnout district. So if what she mounted was a sneak attack on the party establishment, what we are mounting is an all-out frontal assault on the front gate. And I make no mistake about it, but that's exactly what we are doing. We are storming the gate, the front gate. And we're doing that having already taken seats on the sides. We've won victories in the flanks. That's what Jamal Bowman was. That's what Ocasio-Cortez was. Everybody in the squad represented that. And if we're able to win this seat, it's going to unlock a whole bunch of things, because among the things that the squad, for instance, is getting criticized from some corners for now is by having adopted a more conciliatory approach to the corporate cabal running the Democratic Party. And one reason that's happened is because Nancy Pelosi is the figurehead coercing submission and compliance, basically, from members of Congress on the ideological wings. And by removing the enforcer from that equation, I think we can do a lot of things structurally for our democracy to enable greater boldness from my allies, whose ranks I hope to expand. Another similarity I'd note here is the density of our respective districts, both New York's 14th and California's 12th. You can walk across them. My district is 7 miles by 7 miles. It's a 5-hour walk across. So the relative compactness of the district creates lots of opportunities. For instance, I don't own a car, and that's something of an advantage here. I couldn't do that in Texas, right, where you have these districts that stretch for hours and hours and hours. So it lends itself in some respects to certain kinds of campaign tactics, like street visibility actions can be very politically lucrative here, less so in many other places. It also means that things like lawn signs you can't do here because nobody has a lawn, right? So it just means that there's some of the very same tactics they employed are ones that we use here. House parties and relational organizing. There's a particular technology platform that we use that the Ocasio-Cortez campaign originally developed called Reach. It enables us, I was just using it this afternoon, in fact, to identify voters who I met at an event who I didn't have on a list, and I just was meeting them in public, and they were, committing to support our campaign, and it gives us a way to stay connected to them going forward. So, some of those technology platforms are also used in common. Maybe another big difference I would say is just the difference between Crowley and Pelosi. Crowley was weak. Pelosi is not. Crowley, while known within insider Democratic circles, was relatively invisible to the broader public. And, I was mentioning before how Pelosi's name is an object of every news cycle, viral attention in every news cycle. So the relative name recognition that we confront is very different too. It's one big difference between the sneak attack, as you put it, and the sort of like frontal assault that we are waging now. Maybe another difference I'd note is that, because of the point in time, particularly because she was the first one through, I think a lot of people had a skepticism that it was even possible. And because she's carved ground, because she's blazed a trail, I think a lot of people, and Jamal too, and others behind her, people recognize that this can be done. This idea of taking down Goliath, this is not a fantasy tale that we have read. This is an invitation that we are all a part of. And we have won before recently, other races of maybe not quite the same, against the same sized Goliath, but Goliaths nonetheless. And each of their victories demonstrate that Davids can win, that we, the people, have opportunities despite the lopsided power of corporate capital to liberate our voices. And informed and inspired by their successful examples, I think that's one of the things that have driven so many people into our campaign. We have over 20,000 donors around the country, and I think a lot of them are inspired and recognize the possibility of our victory, particularly having seen other campaigns. Let's use Jamal's as an example. If you compare our primary results to Jamal Bowman's polling at the beginning of May, we were at the same place at the beginning of March that he was at the beginning of May. And he went from 14% in May to over 50% in June. And that demonstrates that a lot can change. One of the questions there, looking at our race, is how visible in November and October is the movement that is very ascendant now. We do live in the United States of amnesia, and news cycles can be very ephemeral. So all that is to say, things change very quickly in politics. Who knows what the next 4 months bring. They are going to at least bring thousands and thousands of phone calls and voter contacts from our campaign to voters across San Francisco, and people coming to our campaign from across the country. And I'm grateful for all that support, and hope very much to have yours.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today, Shahid. I did drop some of your links in the chat. Yeah, if you want to make sure I grabbed the right ones, that would be great. I really appreciate you speaking to our chapter today. I'm going to transition at this point to final announcements so that we can wrap up. I know that there's a few people on the call. I see that Jacob is here, and he wants to talk about Brenda Siegel's campaign.
Thanks for having me, everyone. I might take my leave if it's all the same, but I so appreciate the chance to be with you tonight.
Thank you. Thanks so much for coming.
Good night.
Good night.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Jenna. It's so good to see you all. I believe we were at this meeting a month or two ago. But anyways, I'm Jacob, field director with Brenda Siegel's campaign. As you may all remember, Brenda is running for lieutenant governor here in Vermont. And we now have voting underway, have about 45 days until the primary in August, and are doing everything we can, making phone calls, texting, and really getting out to Vermont voters across the state, really letting them know why why she is the most progressive and best candidate for Vermont. And as you all may know, Brenda was recently endorsed by PDA about 2-3 weeks ago. We're certainly appreciative of that. And yeah, I mean, we'll be getting out the vote each and every day between now and August 11th. And would certainly love for you to be able to join us. I will put a link into the chat, and certainly appreciate everything that you all are doing.
Okay, thank you so much, Jacob, for joining us and sharing that information with us. And tell Brenda that we're all happy for her, and congratulations. Dr. Bill, would you like to talk about your healthcare town halls?
Sure, thanks. And good to see you, Jacob, and our best to Brenda. She's absolutely a champion and Good to see you rising in the ranks there in your state, Vermont, which is what probably the size of, is it one congressional district? I mean, we have like in South Orange County alone, there's probably 3 or 4, but but anyhow, Brenda is certainly a rising star and a champion for healthcare and a single payer system, which we're all still looking to Vermont to get past the corporate blockade that kept you guys from moving forward, and like us to the Vermont Workers Center and all the folks there, terrific folks there. So yeah, we've had great speakers. We're still having our healthcare emergency town hall meetings. Since the pandemic hit and we all got quarantined in our homes, we started out with twice a week. We kind of saw some of the politicians do a squirrel in the road thing, which is like entirely inappropriate. It's like, hey, we have an emergency. It's time to kick things into high gear. So we went from once a month with our town hall, our healthcare issue team town hall, to twice a week for the first couple of months. We worked twice a week, and we had Brenda Siegel as one of our guests to speak about her campaign and her position on healthcare. Generally the theme is that Medicare for all is the answer to how we get the resources for universal testing, for contact tracing, for treatment when it becomes available. That's how we get it. It's I think Robert Rice said that the only appropriate response to a public health emergency is to have a really public system to be able to do that. Right now, whenever Mike Pence says public-private partnership, I cringe, because it's that private partnership that's taking the resources out of the system that could supply the need of the people. So in the last couple of weeks, we've had, now we're having them every Sunday, 1 o'clock Pacific time, 4 o'clock Eastern for our friends out there. The last couple of weeks, because of the George Floyd movement, we've had social justice champions, including today we had the Reverend Rodney Sadler, who's part of William Barber's movement of the Poor People's Campaign. And Reverend Sadler was just phenomenal today, speaking about the disparity in healthcare that's going on in our communities of color in particular. So, we all know that's basically for 2 reasons. First of all, communities of color are at a healthcare disadvantage, and that's because corporate insurance does not find lucrative markets in those areas, whether it's in inner city or rural areas, or what we call healthcare deserts. And then the other reason is that so many of our working poor people who happen to be in communities of color are now, sacrificial workers. They're essential workers, or sacrificial, meaning they have to go out and to get that money because it ain't coming from the federal government, and it ain't coming from most states who are calling for budget cutbacks instead of relief to people. And we know Medicare for All will save a ton of money. That would be a relief, would be an economic relief to all communities across the country. So if anybody cares to join us, the information's on our Facebook page. Go to PDA Healthcare, and you'll see what next week's meeting is all about. Again, it's Sundays, 1 o'clock Pacific time. And if you have ideas for guest speakers, contact me, Dr. Bill at pdamerica.org. I'll put it in the chat. Thank you, Jenna.
Thank you, Dr. Bill. Danette, would you like to talk about the climate movies that you guys are doing?
Yes, we actually were to have, I can't remember her first name. We had to switch the viewing of the movie. Dr. Bill,
Gina?
what was her? Gina, yeah, Gina Belafonte was supposed to be at our last viewing yesterday, but Dr. Bill and Hanye had an emergency call to make, so we switched it up, and I actually showed the biggest little farm, which was kind of a nice way to ease people into climate change. And we'd love to have you guys attend. They're every Saturday at 2 p.m. You can get it, check it out on Facebook, Progressive Online Film Festival. And we actually need to decide what films we're going to be screening. We're probably going to do for sure Cowspiracy, because that's a really comprehensive look at what causes climate change. So we're probably going to do that one for sure. But yeah, definitely check it out on Facebook and come join us. It's going to be great.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. Is there anybody else on the list that has an announcement, has a project that you want to talk about? We still have about 5 minutes left. You can just unmute yourself, or you can raise your hand. I'm going to assume that that means no. So for those of you that weren't here earlier, what I'll do is I will play us out with the Chicks March March song again. And you can stick around and watch it if you haven't seen it, or if you want to see it again. And then that'll be the conclusion of our call. So thank you all for joining us. And I will do that right now. I think I have to look it up again. Sorry, guys. Oh.